Right now, it's time for Meet the Author with Nick Higham.
This rather elegant building in London's St James's is the Carlton Club, founded in 1832. To be a member of the Carlton essentially means to be a Conservative. And in fact, in the mid-19th century, when the club was based just round the corner in Pall Mall, was effectively the headquarters of the infant Conservative Party. You can read all about it in The Conservatives: A History, a new book by Robin Harris. He was a member of Margaret Thatcher's inner circle, one of her speechwriters, director of the Conservative Research Department, the man who helped her write her memoirs. He's also written a biography of her to be published after her death. He's not a member of the Carlton, and neither am I. So we went to his home in South London to meet the author. Robin Harris, you've called this book A History of the Conservatives, not the Conservative Party. Why?
Well, that was the title which was chosen in discussion with the publishers, but beyond that, I'm not particularly interested in organisational matters in the Conservative Party. I don't think organisation anyway is the driving force in politics, and certainly not really in the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party has been quite well organised, but it's the leaders, the personalities, that are the key to understanding what happened.
Does it also reflect the fact that the Conservative Party isn't like other political parties, particularly not like the Labour Party?
That's quite true. The Conservative Party is a kind of elective dictatorship. It's been elective since the 1960s, but it's always been more or less a dictatorship. And the control really does rest with the leader and those around the leader. The constitution of the party really sort of comes and goes and nobody notices. If you're in the Labour Party, you're fascinated by consultation and committees and so on, but not in the Conservative Party.
One of the things that comes across strongly from the book is how far this party travelled from its roots in the mid-19th century as a party representing the landed aristocracy, and it became the most successful party of government that we've seen in Britain, arguably in Europe.
Yes.
Despite the fact that first the middle classes, then the working classes got the vote. How did it manage that transformation? Because by rights it should have sort of faded away.
That's quite right. I mean, it should have done. And of course, people thought that it would do. They thought that in the end, the Whigs were going to succeed, then the Liberals were going to succeed, and the Socialists were about to succeed because they understood the way the world was. But actually, of course, the Conservatives understood quite a lot about the world and human nature too. The Conservatives were extremely well led by some very brilliant people, Disraeli, Salisbury among them. But also they benefited very substantially from the errors of their opponents. One of the constant themes is that reforming governments, whether they're Whig governments, Liberal governments, or Socialist governments, they go too far. They alienate the interests, the middle ground, if you like, and the middle ground shifts to whoever is available to go to, and whoever was available was actually the Conservatives. And the Conservative Party has been very good at campaigning and exploiting its opponents' errors.
We now have a Conservative Party in government but in coalition, and that caused a great furore, particularly among quite a lot of Conservative supporters. And yet one of the things, again, that comes across from the book is how often the Conservatives have been in government in coalition, and not always in the driving seat. Even though they were often the biggest party, they didn't necessarily produce the Prime Minister.
They didn't produce the Prime Minister, but I think that all the way through, I suppose you might say that in the wartime, the First World War coalition, Lloyd George was very much in charge. But apart from that, I would say that within the various coalitions from the 1880s to 1945, even if the Conservatives weren't formally in charge, they were more or less in the driving seat, though because they just had a majority of supporters within the coalition. And if you take Salisbury, who I think is a very good example, another old Etonian, a very good example of effective Tory leadership. What he did was he managed the coalition extremely well. He treated his coalition partners with respect, but he also set down exactly what the agenda was going to be. And he ensured that his own supporters knew that he was one of them. And he promoted them and they felt reassurance with him. Those are the conditions, I think, for allowing a successful Conservative-led coalition.
Are there lessons for David Cameron in that?
Yes, I think there are, because clearly at the moment the coalition is not politically successful. The Conservative Party is in rebellion, one of the worst rebellions that there's ever been in the history of the Conservative Party over the European referendum issue. And I can't remember any other time that the chairman of the 1922 committee has ever defied a three-line whip. So those are very serious signs for David Cameron that he's got to be more careful in future.
Finally, if you had to define what makes a Conservative on the basis of having written this book, what would you say?
Well, I have to distinguish between a Conservative with a small c and a Conservative with a big C, because obviously it goes without saying that to be a Conservative with a big C is simply to be a member of the Conservative Party, and to be a successful Conservative leader is to be somebody who wins elections and runs the country without, as Churchill memorably described it, getting scuppered. We don't want to get scuppered. But actually being a Conservative with a small c, well, I think that is trying to keep the country recognisable in its identity and secure in its future. Prosperity does come into that, but it isn't the central thing. Yes, I would say recognisable in its identity and secure in its future. That's the sort of traditional view of conservatism. There's a lot more than conservatism in the Conservative Party. Nobody could possibly, even in their own lives, function on the basis of conservatism. Arguably, we'd never get out of bed. So there are other things in life than conservatism, but that is what I would understand by being conservative.
Robin.